In 2003, a 17-year-old woman named Lena Chapin recorded a confession in which she reported that her mother had taken her stepfather, Gary McCullough's life in 1999. She was later forced to retract her confession, which put a major halt on the ongoing case. A few years later, after starting her own life as a mother in 2006, Lena mysteriously vanished. Her mother told relatives, officers, and detectives that Lena spontaneously moved to Florida to pursue a relationship with a man that she barely knew, without taking any of her belongings with her, leaving behind her toddler son. Lena has still not been found, but the common theory is that her mother, Sandy, is behind her disappearance. Lena Chapin was born on August 29, 1985, and grew up in a lively household of 6 girls and their divorced mother. Lena's siblings described her as sassy, mouthy, and even downright bossy. She often took the control of messy situations by instructing her younger siblings on what to do, whether it was cleaning the house or hiding their mother's dirty secrets. On the same note, however, Lena's sisters said that she was always getting into trouble of some kind, although nothing serious. She was just a young girl with a wild streak because her life lacked a stable father figure and featured a toxic relationship with her mother. Despite commonly disagreeing with her mother's decisions, her sisters said that she operated as number 2 in the household, second only to her very demanding and selfish acting mother. Sandy, Lena's mother, was well known for her active love life. As reported by her daughters, Sandy frequently brought new and strange men around. She forced the family to move from state to state, and even across the nation to pursue her many relationships and marriages. There was little stability available for the young girls, as their mother chased after men endlessly. Lena's sister, Brandy, explained that Sandy would often jump from man to man by striking countless affairs that eventually led to divorce after divorce. Brandy stated that Sandy was never with a man for longer than 2 years and was constantly on the hunt for new lovers. Sandy was living with one man when she met Albert McCullough. The pair got married in November of 1994, and everything seemed perfect at first. The girls reported that Albert was a fun, laid-back, and caring man that held them close to his heart. The girls, even all these years later, recall that Albert was their favorite stepfather and more like a father to them than anyone had been before. About 2 years into their marriage, sadly, Sandy met Albert's brother, Gary. She was allegedly enamored by him and grew obsessive. After a few trials, Gary and Sandy began having an affair in early 1996. Albert was aware that something was going on behind his back with Sandy, but he never would have guessed it was with his brother. Late May of that same year came around and Sandy finally confessed to her betrayal against Albert. In the same breath, she explained that the couple would be taking things to the next step and that she and her daughters were in the process of moving into Gary's small farmland. Although the girls weren't as close to Gary as they had been to Albert, they described him as a decent man with a kind heart. Brandy specifically mentioned in an interview for Netflix's Unsolved Mysteries show that Gary taught the girls how to take care of the farm. They were all given special chores that taught them something new every day. Brandy stated that Gary taught her to never depend on a man and to make use of your skills in everyday life, a very important message for a young girl. After a short period of living together, Sandy and Gary decided to finally tie the knot in December of 1996. According to witnesses, their marriage was average. They weren't toxic for one another and rarely fought, but it seemed as though there wasn't much passion either, which made the relationship seem pretty bland. However, that's not how Gary saw it. He was reported to frequently express his love for his wife and her children, and worked hard to make sure they had a good life. In early 1999, Sandy met a man named Chris Klemp. He was younger and more conventionally attractive than Gary, which caught her eye. After meeting, the pair grew closer and closer and eventually sparked an affair behind Gary's back in March. The first few months were easy enough to hide and deny if questioned, but Gary began to realize that something wasn't right between him and his wife. He paid closer attention to her behaviors and how often she stayed away from home. It became clear that an affair was going on. Gary's friends later reported that he was more hurt about the betrayal than he was angry. He even tried to patch things up with Sandy, but she refused to take any of the necessary steps. In May of 1999, Gary went missing. He was a hardworking man that never missed a day of work in his life, especially without notifying someone first. Those that knew Gary the best immediately assumed that something horrible had happened. Many of his friends, relatives, and co-workers tried to contact him and even stopped by his house, all for nothing. He was gone without a word. After hearing the news that Gary was missing, his close friend, Jeff Allen, went to the police to share a haunting story about the last time he had seen Gary. According to Jeff's interview with Unsolved Mysteries, Gary had come to visit him a few weeks before his vanishing. Gary showed up with an old shotgun and handed it over to Jeff. He asked him to take care of it or hide it somewhere for a while. Gary said that during a big argument, Sandy retrieved the weapon, aimed it at his stomach, and pulled the trigger. Although he was shaken from the event, he assumed that his wife was just trying to intimidate him, but had no real intent to harm him. While Jeff was cleaning it, he realized that a shell was still in the chamber. He questioned Gary about it, who said that he always unloaded his tools after firing, so that nothing would have been in it. Jeff tried to pull the shell out and discovered that it was a loaded round. This implied that Sandy had very different intentions than was previously thought. Gary explained that she likely loaded the weapon on purpose, and the only reason he survived was that the load was a dud and didn't fire due to some technical difficulty. This realization dawned on Gary and sent him into complete shock and disbelief. Similar emotions washed over his friend, Jeff. When the search for Gary began, Jeff immediately took this information to the police, as it implied Sandy might have had something to do with his disappearance. For reasons unknown, the gun and the story were never used as evidence because there was no way to prove exactly what had happened during the exchange between Gary and Sandy. On May 13, 1999, Robert McCullough called an investigator named Brian Martin concerning his brother's disappearance. Brian and his partner reported to Gary's property. While they worked to put an escaped cow back in the pen, they saw Sandy pull up. Brian and the others claimed that Sandy was disappointed to see them there and responded in an indifferent tone when it came to her missing husband. She said sly comments throughout the conversation as she was interviewed by Brian. She said that she'd been thinking about calling the sheriff but thought that it was no big deal. Her story claimed that Gary went to northern Missouri to buy roosters. When Brian asked if she would like to report her husband as a missing person, she responded like a careless teen, saying, "I guess I should do that." Gary was officially reported as missing, and a larger search effort was established. Sadly, Jeff reported that many of Gary's close loved ones knew that they weren't looking for a living man, and instead were hoping to at least find his remains so some form of justice could be discovered and served. A week had passed since Brian's meeting with Sandy, and he obtained a search warrant to check around the house and the property. For the most part, no alarming evidence was found. However, Brian did explain in a full interview with Unsolved Mysteries that the house was completely void of Gary's belongings. He said there was nothing to even indicate that Gary had been living there. They did manage to find a checkbook belonging to Chris Clem, and coincidentally, he moved into the home with Sandy just 2 days after the property investigation. After the discovery of Chris's checkbook and the other evidence that proved the two were romantically involved before Gary vanished, a sheriff was sent to request that Sandy take a polygraph test, as she was slowly becoming the main suspect in a missing persons case, shifting gears into a homicide case. The sheriff, Mick Epperly, asked about the test, and Sandy responded by saying, "If you find a body, I'll take a polygraph," a comment that only furthered the suspicions against her. The next big move in the case was to question Sandy's children. Lena was about 13 years old at the time and reportedly had a sour attitude throughout the entire process. She refused to answer certain questions, painted her mother as an innocent angel, and demanded that the other children remained silent during the interview to prevent a slip of truth from escaping their mouth. Investigators at the time recognized the behavior as obvious guilt and possible fear of upsetting her mother. Brandy mentioned later that Lena had privately expressed she was scared the family would get torn apart if their mother got into trouble because they would be taken away and split up by Child Protective Services. As the case began the process of turning cold, Sandy and Chris took the girls and moved them to St. Louis, where the couple got married and they lived happily together as a family for about a year. By August of the next year, the family had made another big move to Sligo, Missouri, where they spent another chunk of time under the radar of the diminishing investigation. Lena worked a multitude of jobs while living in Sligo, and it seemed to others that she was trying to avoid a major weight in the back of her mind. She got involved in drinking and drugs and often acted out violently, or had completely random outbursts of crying silently, even in a room full of people. For everyone around her, it was clear that Lena was trying to fight demons too strong for her will. Her sisters knew all along exactly what was going through Lena's head during those tough moments. Lena finally started dating a young man that encouraged her to confess what she knew to someone. He suggested telling a member of Gary's family if she was too scared to go to police. Lena traveled back to where she once lived with Gary and contacted his brother Albert, her former stepfather. She allegedly told her boyfriend that Albert was someone she could trust and she truly cared about his peace of mind. When Lena arrived, she agreed to have her confession recorded. During it, she told Albert every detail she could about what happened on May 11, 1999. Gary was going about his normal day, sitting on the couch eating. Sandy walked into the room and without saying a single word, fired at him 2 or 3 times right in the head. After this, Sandy employed her daughter and dragged Gary into the bedroom, where she covered him in some form of plastic or tarp, as well as a few bundles of loose hay. A short time later, Albert shared this recording with law enforcement. When Sandy heard the news of the alleged confession, Lena was still young and under her control. It's unknown exactly how, but Sandy successfully got Lena to retract her statement and remove it from the record, saying that all of it was lies. In 2006, Gary's family lost all hope of bringing justice to their loved one's passing. Since a criminal trial couldn't be held, they organized a wrongful death lawsuit against Sandy and Chris, hoping that it would bring some peace or light to the tragedy. They hoped the couple would be held accountable for what they had done. Around this time, Lena had just given birth to her son, Coulter. The suit and her previous confession were miles behind her as she was working hard to provide for her son and hopefully one day start a family, one much unlike her own. Even though Lena had altogether removed herself from the Gary situation and had no desire to speak in court against her mother, her sisters believed that Sandy was still overly paranoid, that her daughter would turn against her and freely encourage the recorded confession she previously made. After all, Lena was under fire for the lawsuit as well, but offering her statement would clear her wrongdoings in the eyes of the law, and she wouldn't be held responsible for any of her actions. In February of 2006, it was time for the court summons to be delivered, yet the lawyers were unable to find Lena. Sandy told them that she had run off to Florida with some strange man to start a new life. When her sister, Brandy, reported to Lena's apartment, where she lived with her boyfriend at the time, Jason, she was given the same story. A look around the apartment showed that Lena didn't take a single item that belonged to her. From family photos and clothes to special documents and ID materials, she left everything behind, which made Sandy's cover story even more unbelievable. During the months that followed, as Lena remained missing, her sisters went to the stand and shared their memories surrounding Gary's disappearance. Brandy stated in an interview that when she and the other girls returned home from school on the day that he vanished, they were met at the door by their frantic mother, who demanded they run to the field to see some kittens that had just been born by a stray. Brandy stayed behind because she was late for her chore of milking the cows. She waited outside for a while because her mother wouldn't let her get her supplies from the kitchen. Finally, Brandy grew tired of waiting and rushed in. She saw her mother and sister wearing protective clothing and cleaning the floor with vigor. She reported that they were using bleach and pulled the carpet up in a few places. Later that night, Sandy and Chris loaded the body into their vehicle and drove off. The detail was witnessed by one of the girls, Robin. She happened to wake up and saw the pair struggling to load what was a body. Robin noticed the boots the body was wearing and knew instantly that it was Gary. Sadly, under her mother's control, she was too afraid to speak of the incident with any investigators or lawyers at the time. At one point in the midst of the madness, Brandy shared her story of the time she was threatened by Chris and her mother. Brandy was still underage, but had accepted that she knew the truth. She and her mom got into a dramatic argument, during which Brandy threatened to tell the cops everything she knew. Her mother forced her into a truck with Chris. The trio drove to a deserted area, where Chris pulled her out of the truck and put a weapon to her head. Despite her screams, which begged her mother to protect her, Sandy reportedly stayed blank and emotionless in the car while staring forward. In a split second of self-defense, Brandy grabbed her mom for a big hug. She stated in the interview that she thought this would stop Chris from firing, in fear that he may hurt her mother too. Eventually, Sandy called him off and tried to comfort Brandy. This moment has remained a highlight for Brandy, who knows just how far her mother is willing to go to protect herself. To this day, Lena has not been found. Sandy filed for abandonment of a child against Lena and was granted full custody of her grandson.